spiritual practices in our Christian tradition to draw upon for all of life's experiences. What we might need is a more conscious awareness of how we are feeling in these unusual times, and how those feelings either inspire or dull our commitment to continue maintaining life-giving practices, and how we might need to adapt our ways of being faithful and hopeful as we live by different rhythms than we have been accustomed to in our more predictable patterns of the more ordinary times we knew before mid-March of this year. I will say that I have noticed some patterns in the responses of people I listen to and talk to in spiritual direction and in other contexts. And they are not necessarily consistent with one another. Some of the people I know have been actually thriving in isolation, appreciating all the extra time for solitude and prayer as other commitments have dropped off of their calendars. Others are feeling the challenge and loneliness of isolation because even the introverts among us are not necessarily non-relational, and we need people contact that Zoom or phone calls simply don't satisfy in the same way as spending time and touch together in the same place. Others still are overwhelmed with too much relational contact in these past months, with children around the house 24/7, spouses in the same living and working space day in and day out, and sometimes extras, in-laws or elderly parents added into the mix as they have been brought into the family home away from the risks of living in extended care homes or the isolation of living alone. What those people want is some more quiet time, please, some more alone time, some more solitude to balance the sensory overload of constant interaction. And what all of us are missing, regardless of our home setting, is likely the habitual life-giving practices of corporate worship, which have been part of our weekly rhythm and that disappeared in the way we knew it suddenly 6 months ago. And that even when and as it is gradually returning, will not look normal for us the way we knew it in early March of 2020, for what appears will be a very long time from now. And that, among many other things, is a source of grief and loss for all of us. There are many things about these unusual times that are sources of grief, whether we have named it for ourselves or for others or not. What kinds of spiritual practices might bring solace and life and hope given these parameters, these realities, these dynamics, the losses, and the opportunities before us? First of all, I think it is important to recognize that so many things can be spiritual practices. So many things can be prayer. If what we do is life-giving for us, body, mind, and spirit, it is potentially a holistic commitment that we might call a spiritual practice, since we are people with an incarnational spirituality rooted and grounded in the incarnational value God manifested in the birth, life, and embodied resurrected person of Jesus. Regular physical exercise can be a spiritual practice that celebrates and takes care of this miraculous body God has given us. Sitting quietly and paying attention to our breath, being present to it as the breath of the Spirit sustaining life in us, can be a spiritual practice that grounds us, renews us, and settles us when we are inclined to go madly off in all directions, mentally or physically, or to become anxious with where we are. Likewise, if what we do intentionally in the presence of God, potentially it can be prayer for us, bringing us into relational contact with our Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer, whether that be taking a photo of a dandelion gone to seed. I have done that more than once, and felt the beauty of creation captured in the image of a common weed? Or sitting with a Bible open in front of us, eyes tracing the words of the weekly lectionary, heart open to how the passage might speak to our own experience, our gratitude, and our yearnings? Dare I also say that if what we are doing intentionally as spiritual practice with our bodies, our minds, and our hearts feels boring or tedious, dry or uninspiring, it might still be an important spiritual practice for us, because sometimes being in the desert of unusual times, like a pandemic, means we feel like desert people. And what we know is that God never abandons God's people, not even through 40 years in the wilderness, though the experiential feeling may not at that time seem to validate that truth. And there is a long history of saints who have gone before us, who have lived in what we might call, identify, or personally recognize as the dark night of the soul. There is still value and merit in just showing up, though the gains may be hard to measure in the moment. Having said that, I do believe that overall God desires to nurture and sustain us with a sense of meaning, encouragement, and wonder in life. And if your spiritual practice is not leading you in that direction, it may well be that choosing a different practice more suitable to our current conditions could be a way to renew your spirit and recharge your embodied sense of purpose as we face all the unknowns before us. Changed times, in other words, might invite changed patterns, changed rhythms, as well as possibly renewed commitments to the practices we have known in the past that we have allowed to drift away in the context of being overwhelmed, anxious, restless, or bored. Here are a few general observations before I get some more specific practices before us. If you find yourself more alone than you would like to be, become more intentional about connecting with others. In a pandemic, that is hard. But as someone whose professional life involves a lot of listening, I began this pandemic with a commitment to myself to make contact every day or two via Zoom, email, the phone, or an outdoor walk with someone whose role and disposition as a friend, spiritual director, family member, or counselor was to listen to me at least as much as I was called upon to listen to them. We all need mutuality. We all need support. In his book on spiritual disciplines, Father Thomas Ryan surprised me by beginning his first chapter not with prayer or fasting or service, all of which he includes, but with friendship. Relational people need relationships. In a pandemic, we need to be more intentional about how that need and that spiritual practice is being met when the unusual avenues have been blocked, removed, or made more difficult. Likewise, if you find yourself with more people time than you can manage because you have been under a roof 24/7 with family and or extended family, no break from each other, or no diversity in your relational time, be aware of your need for solitude and seek ways to fit that into your life. You might have to communicate to your family that this is a need that doesn't reflect at all on your love or commitment to them, but on your own requirement for balance and well-being. Shut the door on your bedroom or office for a set period of time, or go for a walk by yourself. Wake up a little earlier than everyone else in the morning, or stay up a little later in the evening, Or negotiate with your spouse about how each of you can spell the other off, so you are both getting solitude in the midst of close quarter living with dependence. If Jesus went apart in solitude again and again in the Gospels in order to spend time in prayer or rest, time away even from his closest friends who were like his family, then surely that is a good model for our needs as well. Third, if you are finding that you are spending far more time preparing worship services than usual, with all the extra work of bringing the experience to people online, but getting far less back because you have no interaction in real time with the people experiencing the worship you are leading, then find your own worship service. We have more options available to us than ever before, broadcast across the internet. Prepare your own service, and then let someone else bring that gift to you. Eugene Peterson, pastor and writer, comments in his memoir, The Pastor, that every Sunday morning he would go to the church early, not to rehearse his own sermon, but to read a sermon from one of his favorite author preachers, so that his spirit was being nourished and nurtured before he showed up to do the same for his congregation. Now more than ever, we need that kind of support, because recording worship is so different than embodied, shared time together on Sunday morning. And now more than ever, we have options to choose from. Find what gives you life. Make a commitment to it. Try not to just surf the internet checking out the technological merits of another church's posting or channel surf, to pass the time, looking to be entertained. That is not how we understand worship, and not how we expect others to tune into our worship services online either. Let me add another piece to that, which would apply in any time, the ordinary and the unusual times we are in right now. It is, it is not necessarily the most fruitful spiritual practice to let your sermon preparation be your devotional time for the week. You may find yourself nourished by the word in that practice, but you will also be reading for ideas, an angle, an illustration, a way to finesse the text for your people. Take a Eugene Peterson approach. Let your spiritual reading be spiritual reading without any other agenda. Give the Spirit more room not only to blow through the text, but to blow through your heart, through the crevices of your own being that need to be softened, touched, broken open, challenged, set on fire, or set free. Now let me give you a few more specific options in the context of what I have already said. First, if you don't have a spiritual director already, you might consider finding one. Most will meet people online in these times. It is good to have someone who dedicates their time to you for your sake, listening to your experience, your perspective, your challenges and joys, someone whose calling is to pray with you and for you. The very act of articulating and being listened to can be life-giving, especially for those who spend so much ministry time feeling the call to listen to and encourage others. Second, find time to rest. Sabbath is a good practice in all times, but perhaps more challenging when our work schedule looks so different and when the boundary lines of time or place have become blurred by isolation practices. When is rest time, relaxation time, reinvigoration time, play time for you? Where does it take place. Be specific and intentional, because the gray areas can be hard to navigate. When dance lessons, dance classes, and dance practice dropped out of my life in mid-March, I started walking daily for the exercise, but I started reading more novels as a means of relaxation and renewal, so that every book I picked up did not have direct bearing on the next project or presentation or class I was working on. Third, also, of course, pray, and not just incidentally as the day unfolds. Again, author Thomas Ryan talks about on-cushion and off-cushion prayer, as does Jane Renard in her book, Truly Awake and Fully Alive, suggesting we need both. The on-cushion time is intentional time with God. You may not do it on a cushion, of course. You may do it in a chair, or if you have a lot of extroverted energy, you may do it walking or running. But dedicate intentional time to be with God, and let it be not only talking time, but listening time as well. When the psalmist says, "Be still and know that I am God," it may not mean physical stillness, though that is a benefit for many of us, but it is an invitation to give God our hearts, our ears, our inner being. Sometimes that happens for me on a daily walk. Sometimes it happens with a candle lit and the Bible open on my lap to a particular passage. Consider also expanding your definition of prayer. If it might mean doing anything intentionally in the presence of God, think outside of the box for your off-cushion time. Weed the garden with God, giving thanks for all that grows and the wonders of creation. Play with your children, acknowledging God in your midst and in their enthusiasm and delight. Pump iron with God, relishing the strength and physical needs of your body. Prepare a meal with God, savoring the aroma, the creativity, and the varieties of food. These too can be times when, as Brother Lawrence said and wrote about 400 years ago, we, quote, practice the presence of God, unquote. We need those too. They are the opportunities which are endless to recognize and engage in God's presence in and throughout the day, in and throughout the rhythms of our lives right now, with all the unasked for limitations and unanticipated freedoms we have. I might lastly say this: practice what Ignatius of Loyola calls the examen of awareness. One way to approach this is at the end of the day, name that for which you are most grateful for that day. Name also that for which you are least grateful. Offer both to God, your thanks and what might be your confession or your lament. Then ask God, given this reflection, how you are being invited to live into tomorrow. How are you being called forth? I have really only touched the surface with what I have shared, but it may be enough to get some conversation going in this time of question and answer, or I prefer to think of it as a time of sharing, a pooling of our experiences and our insights. And so I open this time up to you. As you have heard, you might want to start with anything that particularly stands out for you in what I have just said. Maybe it raises a question, maybe it confirms something, maybe it invites, maybe you feel some resistance to something I said. Any of those, if there's something you would like to say, and I gather, Bishop Larry, I'm probably in charge of this part, So yes, he says, so I will look for physical hands up like that if somebody wants to say something and then acknowledge you and give you a chance to respond. Ron Flamond, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Faith, so much. And like Rita said, it's good to see everybody's faces again. Just to comment about one of my reactions when you were talking about feeding ourselves and going online and finding other services, which is something I've really appreciated doing during this time. I had an incident happen right around Easter that I chuckle about just about every day. I went online. I went on because we post our services on YouTube. So on Easter Monday, I went on Easter Sunday in the evening, I went to YouTube just to view the video we had posted, and when my video showed up, and it had 19 views on it, and then the one that was going to come next was from the San Bernardino Valley in California, and it had 1.9K viewers. And so I chuckled at that. And I watched ours a little bit, and I watched a few minutes of theirs. And then the next day, I went back on to YouTube, and there it was again, same, and it was their Easter Monday communion service. And it had 119 viewers, and then there was our video with it had by that time 156. I went, there we go. And I guess my comment and all of that is, although it's humorous and I find it funny, and I'm glad it happened, it's sometimes it's difficult to knock that kind of image out of my head, to go and just be a part of something online without taking a look at the number of viewers that are there and how that relates to what you're doing specifically or what I'm doing specifically. Just an interesting side thing that I became aware of and am aware of when I go online to do that. So I have to make sure, not to let that play with me so much, not take it seriously.
Thanks, Ron. Yeah, I think that's sometimes when we go online, we almost get too much information, right? And when we're working so hard to prepare our own services, the tendency is to sort of see if others are doing it better or more successfully. And then maybe we're not really being in a worshipful space. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'm not fully aware.
Anyone else? Trish, go ahead.
Hi. No, I was just going to say, I think it's such an important time for us to be supportive and kind to one another. And this has been, I don't want to speak for Lindsay, but this has been our experience here, that people at Holy Spirit have been incredibly supportive. And I think, us who are working in ministry professionally, to not compare ourselves to each other and just to be supportive and find those new ways to connect and offer help to one another, because we're all kind of reinventing things, and it is a lot of work. It's very draining, but it's also very exciting and life-giving at the same time. So you're all fantastic. You're doing a great job, and what you're doing is enough.
Yes, thank you for that too. Mm-hmm. Heidi.
I was really struck by your words about making contact with someone who listens to you at least as much as I listen to them, or if I quoted you correctly. I found at one point this summer, it was like, I felt like I was doing all the listening, and there wasn't a lot of places I could go to be listened to. So that just really resonated.
Thank you. Yeah. And as I mentioned, I was quite intentional about that myself at the beginning. If we happen to be people who are single for one reason or another, or live alone, that's even more of an issue, because we don't have the sort of interactions at the end of the day with other people in the house.
Absolutely. My dog doesn't talk back to me.
Thanks, Heidi.
Posted.
Anyone else? Lindsay.
I know I really appreciated you lifting up again for me that let spiritual reading be spiritual reading. I know I found it quite difficult in the beginning of the pandemic to have headspace for any reading. And then as the summer months went on and I set up my hammock outside, I still really didn't have space for reading, but I found the joy of audiobooks. So I've been getting books out from using the Libby app, which is something that a lot of libraries have, and been listening to books that I've been wanting to read, whether spiritual or on a topic I'm interested in, or just for my own sake. So that's been really helpful in finding a different way to interact with texts, maybe when I don't have the headspace to be reading them.
Good point. I discovered some good podcasts this summer when I was out walking. And so sometimes I just there's a ravine near me, and sometimes I don't want anything in my ears because I want to hear the water and I want to hear the birds. And but when I'm walking more in trafficked areas, it's good to just let my mind be engaged while I walk. There's something in the rhythm of both of those at the same time that can work as well. Anyone else? Are there, for example, oh, go ahead, Susan.
I found one of the gifts of this time when I have had difficulty focusing has been the sermon series sermons from our bishops and assistants. We've got to see some old friends that we wouldn't have heard otherwise. And that, I don't know, hope of the breadth and the depth of our church. It's not just this little place and this little difficulty, but we are so much together, and that has been encouraging.
Thanks. Oh, this is really timely. My phone's going to ring. I'm just going to put myself on mute, but as I do so, what other spiritual practices might you add to my suggestions? There, it's done now. What other spiritual practices either might you add to what I've said, or things? Some of you have mentioned a few things already, but can you think of anything else? You know, because it wasn't by any means. Okay, Juliana, you have your hand up.
The use of music can sometimes be helpful too.
Right. Okay, and somebody else chatted in art, using art also. Richard, yeah.
Oh, you're here. Gardening, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Making stuff like jam, jelly, giving it away. Thanks, Trish. Are there particular things? Oh, running is a spiritual practice. Yes. And Phil, yes, the daily office. I know a few people who are really appreciating the fact that you are doing that and are participating with you online. Are there things that used to work that aren't working for you right now because of the times? Kathleen.
One of the things I've always found possible is just finding a quiet space outside in nature. Places that I can't go to so easily now. I found I can replace it with photos from there, but it's not the same.
photos and videos of places. Yes, because raise your hand, how many of you did not have a traditional holiday this year? Probably like most of us, right? That's a loss for sure. And Marcus Wilhelm isn't with us today, but he is my pastor, and he was scheduled to go on a sabbatical just a week or two after the pandemic happened, and he didn't get his sabbatical at this point, but it wouldn't have been a very satisfactory one if he had. So definitely that has played into our own rhythms of rest as well. Anybody else who has recognized that there are some things that are just really not working for you now that have worked prior to this time? Daryl. Are you muted? I can't hear. I think you're muted. Can't hear you. And for some reason, even though you're unmuted, I can't hear you. I'm not sure why that is. You might be able to type it into the chat, because I'm not quite sure, because your mute button has gone on and off. And okay, and while you're thinking about that, Trish says, going for lunch and coffee with colleagues. I miss this. Yes, yes. Probably many of us do that, miss that. How many of you have found that preparing worship has been more of a time user in these times? Maybe not everybody, but some of you who are in active ministry, and some of you aren't, I realize. But you know, it's one thing I've heard from several people, which is that they're investing more in it, and they're getting less out of it, because well, you're all doing it in different ways, and some of you are actually on site with colleagues, and that's slightly different than if you're taping it by yourself in advance, and you don't get to see people's faces, you don't get to be part of that shared experience of community. So I realize it's different for a lot of people. Is there, oh, Kathleen.
One thing, I'm not doing it right now, but one thing I found really useful is normally I would speak to people after service and couldn't do that. So I just got in the habit of Sunday afternoon getting on the phone and having just quick phone calls with people. And that really helped, because some of it had just let me know what was going on with them. But I also got feedback on the service.
Okay. Yeah. Phone calls. Even in outdoor services, you can't see reactions with all the masks. Very good point. Very good point. Yeah. I sometimes write poetry, and I haven't for a long time, but as I've been places, I've thought to myself, the world without smiles. That's where we are right now. You know, we're the world without smiles, and what kind of effect is that having on us, even as we are with people? I'm going to read Daryl's comment. Since I have retired at the end of June, I know that my worth is not determined by my productivity, but I am feeling a kind of restlessness, or feeling that I should be doing something more productive. I know Bishop Larry at the beginning of all this was reminding people to take time for rest and to stop, because it can feel in ministry at any time like it's never done, but it can certainly feel that way when those lines between working and not working become kind of blurred, or when the rest doesn't have its normal pattern of breaking away from the office space or the worship space, or however that works for some of you. Thanks, Daryl. Other comments or observations in terms of what you have discovered that has been life-giving, and some of you have mentioned making jam, doing the daily office. Are there other things you've discovered positively in this time in terms of spiritual practice or prayer that you might not have if circumstances had stayed normally as they were. More time in the garden. Janice, is that your hand up? Yeah.
So it's this spiritual practice slash game. Michael's on the road 5 days a week, my husband. So I'm alone a lot of the time here, and I use walks as my discipline. But what I do is I try and make every person I walk by smile in some way or another, or just to throw them a little off balance in a positive way. And I don't know, it brings me joy. It brings me joy when they're shocked or surprised at something I'm able to do as we pass by socially distant across the sidewalks.
Thank you. When I was out for my walk yesterday, and it was it was a little longer than some, it was getting close to an hour and a half, and I went into the ravine, and I went to the one end, and I was on my way back, and then I took a little piece at the top end and came back, and I passed a woman, and I met her, and then I met her again. And the third time we encountered each other, she goes, "You are just getting around." And it was just a personal contact with someone I didn't know. But in the course of a day, I realized I'm saying hi to a lot of people because I'm meeting them out on the path, but I'm not having conversations with very many people because that's just in a different context. And so yeah, so I had the sense that I'm having conversations on the screen, and I'm having contact with the faces I see out on the path, because most people are not wearing masks, so you can actually have some facial expressions with each other. Other comments about what you've discovered, gift-wise or not gift-wise, in these challenging times? Rita.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. I don't know if it's a spiritual practice or not, but it seems like for me, the fact that our kids are in the US and we can't get down there to see them. So daughter and I are texting more than we ever did before, just short texts where she's into, how are you? And then if it's going well with the kids homeschooling or not, I'm able to just say, give her a word of encouragement. Once in a while I say, yeah, I'll pray for that, or for you, or for the boys, or whatever. I guess that's a spiritual practice. I don't know. It feels good.
And it's connection, right? In the absence of the real incarnational face-to-face, person-to-person, it's important connection. And as I mentioned, in Thomas Ryan's book, I was kind of surprised that the first thing he mentioned was friendship or relationship as a spiritual practice, because that's such a part of who we are. In my own family, what really surprised me, I have a sister who lives in the States as well, and she can sometimes go months without communicating, but just around Easter, before Easter, she sent out an email to all of us in our immediate family with a kind of indirect invitation for us to reply back. And then I kind of picked up on that, and we've had going now since Easter time, a kind of weekly or bi-weekly family communication. Here's an update from South Dakota, here's an update from Edmonton, here's an update, and everybody gets to read each other's stories. And that's been a really positive thing that I'm not sure would have happened without the pandemic. So I'm very grateful for that, and I hope it doesn't drop when we get back into more normal routines. Comments, questions, observations?
Yeah, Richard here.
Okay, yes, Richard.
Yeah, so I've just found sickness makes makes all of this more challenging. and not only for myself, but also I was talking the other day with a colleague, Ray Christensen, who's now virtually blind, and you know, he's very isolated, very much alone, and it was really great to you know, reach out to him and talk to him, and yeah, I realized how, you know, I when Daryl was talking about not being productive, I was thinking of all these people, but now I'm focusing particularly on a colleague, Ray, who was feeling lonely, and you know, who has just a wonderful wealth of life experience to share, but he's not preachy. He's still alert. His mind is still active, and so that's just a reminder to me to like, I'm not alone, you know, in being immunocompromised or what have you, and I found that helpful.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, everyone. I think Bishop Larry is going to step in at this point. So I appreciate all your contributions and your willingness to enter this experiment today, the beginning of something that's going to take us into the rest of this year.
Thank you very much, Faith. I echo those thanks. Thanks to everyone for joining today in this first Synod Connect. Faith, thank you for, you said that you just scratched the surface, but at the same time, I felt for me personally that you took us deeply into a holy moment together in community, gathered in this way. So thank you, Faith, for sharing with us, for your words, for your presence with and among us here today and within our Synod. Our Faith has agreed that this would be recorded, and it will be available on our Synod Connect tab on the Synod website if you'd like to hear it again or listen to it again. So thank you for that as well, Faith. Our next Synod Connect will be October the 8th, and Reverend David Saudi will be presenting. He is the Synod's ministry team chair for the care of creation, and he will be sharing about their plans, their work, and so on around care of creation. So please do join us, and again, remember to register for that event as well. I wanted to direct your attention to where Marla and Pastor Prema are. For those of you who haven't met our new office administrator, Marla Berg is there waving. And some of you may have met Marla before, but this is Marla, and it's wonderful to have Marla with us as part of the Synod Office team. So welcome to you, Marla. It's great to have you with us. I'd like to conclude our time with prayer today. Again, thank you, Faith, and the Lord be with you. And let us pray. God, you journey with us as you journeyed with your people through desert and storm, in unusual times, through Exodus, on the road to Emmaus. You are God who journeys with us in losses, in grief, and in opportunity and possibility. We give you thanks today for your servant Faith, for the gifts that you've given her, for her ministry as a spiritual director with us and among us in this synod. Continue to uphold her. We give you thanks for her sharing, her leadership, her presentation today. And we give you thanks for each one gathered today. For Marla and Prema, for Susan and Cliff, for Heidi, for Phil and Janice and Daryl, for Kathleen and Lee, for Kathy and Jane, Lindsay, Richard, Wallace, Garth, Ron, Trish, Art, Juliana, Rita. Thank you for your presence with us in the gift of this community. And go with us in this time of changing patterns and experiences, of changing times and rhythms. Go with us that we might be renewed. For we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you, everyone. Blessings to you. Again, thank you, Faith. Thank you to each one. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.